Hey everyone, Pastor George here with today's Bible study recap. And today in Bible study, we looked at Judges chapter 8 after taking our hiatus last week. So this week, we looked at the continued story of Gideon and how it ends. And I think you can start to see, hopefully, if you've been following along, how the cracks are starting to form in the nation of Israel. Because that's kind of the whole point of this chapter. You'd think it would be, well, they're just going around and they're fighting guys and stuff like that. But if you really follow the narrative, you can see kind of the infighting that's going on. And that starts off right at the very beginning, right? Because at the beginning, if you'll remember last time, the men of Ephraim are called to help out, and they come in at the end. And now our chapter begins with them being upset at Gideon. And they're upset at Gideon because they think they should be the leaders, and that they were called in at a later time annoys them greatly. So they get really upset that Gideon has done this to them. So they begin to fight back, but Gideon is able to get them, back in their place. But what happens then is he goes to other cities, Gideon does, and in those cities, the people there refuse to help him, right? He goes to Sukkot, and he goes to Penuel, right? And at those places, right, they basically says, well, this isn't our problem, right? We don't want to. They're hedging their bets, basically, right? Because they're saying, well, Gideon might win, but he also might lose. And we think he has a higher chance of losing against these two Midianite kings that he's tracking down. And so if we help him and he loses, they're going to come back and they're going to destroy us. And so they go, well, this isn't our fight, right? You go do whatever you need to do. And then he says, fine, to both of them, I'm going to come back and I'm going to put you guys in your place. I'm going to break down the tower, because there's this famous tower in the city of Penuel. So they go, right, and Gideon defeats these two kings. Actually, the battle itself is 3 verses, 10 through 12, right? And then the rest of the chapter is him going back to these other cities and destroying them. And he goes first to Sukkot, and he went to Penuel, and he kills the people that are there, right? He destroys them and he kills the people there out of, I guess, vengeance for not helping him, right? And then he goes then he kills the two Midianite kings, and not surprising, takes their stuff from them. And then we have a really interesting passage where, so first of all, just the first part, you see the cracks form because this is infighting, right? Sukkot and Penuel are Israelite cities. So these aren't just random people. These are other Israelites. So they're fighting with each other. They're not helping each other. And Gideon destroys them, right? So these cities aren't helping. Gideon brings justice or vengeance back down upon them. You can see that they're fighting. And then you have Ephraim at the beginning, right? So the cracks are forming in Israel. These get kind of worse, and they're actually helped in becoming worse by Gideon. So from there, right, what do the people do? Well, the people ask Gideon to rule over them. And this is a pretty interesting thing. This is like a recurring theme in Judges, right? You'll talk about how there's no king in Israel. Now, that's a historical point, right? There isn't a king. There's not like a David or a Solomon or anyone like that, or Saul. But at the same time, it's also a theological point where the people are supposed to have God as their king, right? This is what happens in 1 Samuel. And they don't, right? They're not treating God that way. Instead, they want to lift up a human to be king, and they ask Gideon to be king. And Gideon says, no, that's okay. But he really lives like a king, right? So he says, the Lord should rule over you, which is great. Good answer, Gideon. But then he says, but everyone give me tribute, right? So they have gold earrings, and so they bring gold to him and things like that. And he gets 1,700 shekels of gold. And he gets lots of pendants and things from his conquest of the Midians and all the things they got from their camels. And then he takes that and he uses it to make an ephod, which is a priestly garment, right? And he uses it to, this is basically ends up becoming a ritual item for him that they keep in their city. And all Israel hoard after it there. And it became a snare to Gideon and his family. Now, when you see that, what does that mean? Well, it means that they began to treat this thing as an idol. So they began to pray and to worship this golden ephod, right? That this beautiful kind of, probably beautiful, I'm sure it was, piece of art that was made to kind of commemorate this. And an ephod is something a priest would wear, right? So it's meant to kind of be like a totem or a fetish or whatever you want to say, in order to get God to bless them, right? So they build this thing in order to get it. And so all of Israel is worshiping this thing or holding it to way high of a cord that it doesn't need to be held in. And this should remind us of Gideon's own father, Joash, right? Because Joash also worshipped the Baal, right? He worshipped Baal. And so the people there are kind of repeating the cycle. Sure, it's not another god, but it's taking away their attention from the one that they should be worshiping, right? So it ends the cycle by saying Midian was defeated, they didn't oppress the people anymore, and the land had rest for 40 years in the days of Gideon, right? So you have the end of the cycle. That's right there. And then it talks about how, or beginning of the end, I should say, because we're about to start something new soon. But you see in this next paragraph how Gideon doesn't live a particularly faithful life in the sense of what does he kind of put his stock in, because you'll see that he has tons of wives, he has 70 children, and he has concubines on top of that. And he had a concubine in the town of Shechem who bore him a son, and the name of the son was Abimelech. Now Abimelech is Hebrew for son of a king. So even though Gideon says, I'm not a king, he lives and acts like a king of that time is expected to live and act like. And that shows that he's kind of fallen, right? He's not lived up to what he is supposed to do. He's become entranced by the pleasures of the flesh, right? Gold and things like that. And this Abimelech guy is going to play a big role moving forward. Next week, we're going to spend time looking at Abimelech. But Gideon then dies, and as soon as Gideon dies, the people turn away from the Lord and they go after the Baals again, and they make Baal-Berit their god. And so the people, it ends by saying, the people of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who delivered them from the hand of all their enemies on every side, and they did not show steadfast love to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in return for all the good he had done to Israel. Right? So they just go back to their old ways, and this is a new cycle. So a new cycle means we're going to get a new judge soon, but first we need to see what the problem is going to be, and that's going to come from Abimelech. And this is going to be real Game of Thrones, real Wild West stuff next week. So tune in for that. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday. Peace out.